Welcome to the Blue Hour. Every week, Charlie and myself get together and talk about emerging trends in the tech space. This week, we have some fun things to talk about, including automating work processes, updates to ChatGPT Plus, and maybe we'll get into some extra stuff. Also, we always got the hot take at the end, so you gotta stick around. But topic number one: automating work processes. This is something you're super interested in, so I kind of want to hear where your head's at with it.
Yeah. Well, so much of my so much of work can be from a business development and sales perspective. So much of work is like having a team of people where like the newest people on the team ultimately source leads. So they go ahead and they find people who are qualified. And so what it's going to mean is ultimately they're casting a really wide net and they don't necessarily understand the products. And so they're just looking for people who are sort of like they're keyword searching. So they're looking for crunch-based data on people who have recently raised money, potentially, who are in the tech space and actually want to actually be able to maybe spend some of that money, right? It's on different tooling. Or if it's somebody more like maybe another component of that is inbound marketing. So you get inbound flows, and then you're receiving these email addresses and phone numbers, and then you're ultimately going to want to tailor a message to them and have a conversation started. And so there are lots of different ways to actually get high-level data, like the most sort of broad, widest net, and then you put that into a system that you have internally, whether that's Notion or Salesforce, sort of on opposite ends of the spectrum, like a CRM at a highest level, and then using that information and that contact information to actually send tailored messages. So outbound versus inbound is obviously a different sort of messaging, but both can be automated. I've used
Yeah.
lots of different tools like Outreach or HubSpot, depending on sort of like what part of the flow they're in. But I think at a high level for me, a lot of the companies I work with now, or work for now, or get paid to work for now are really, really small. They can't afford Salesforce. They can't afford these automation tools like Outreach or something like that, which is a SaaS product in and of itself. So the idea is that I'm most often using Notion. I have a database of contact people with company names, email addresses, including the contact specifically for that company, not just like a generic email address for the company. And then I want to be able to sort of like using the different information that I've done, the research that I've done to have different columns in there, like maybe their vertical as an organization or their sort of like their value proposition and why it's interesting for us, depending on which company I'm sort of representing. I want to be able to tailor messages, right? So you can use Zapier to connect your email server to something like Notion and automate some of that. But it'd be nicer in the same way that it's nice for developers. They can write code, but now they're able to write code in a way that's actually language process, like in natural language processing. So you're able to sort of like speak out loud or write out in just a natural sentence what it is you'd like to accomplish, and have it then
Yeah.
infer based on its understanding of the MLL, the large language model it's using, or the LLM. It can then come back to that and sort of like draw inferences on it. So I think like making the outbound process more seamless is sort of where my head's at with that. But
Yeah.
yeah, scaling my ability without having to like take so much time. It's hours and hours of work we're
Yeah.
talking about that could be
Is
condensed into
the
minutes, I think.
Yeah. What's the most time consuming part of it? Is it going through each column? Is it writing the emails? Is it figuring out how to tailor the email to them, or like all of the above?
I think a lot of the thing that I think would save the most time is like the most monotonous of it. So like I think it's important to have the human touch. And obviously a lot of these organizations you want for them to know you wrote it yourself. And so it'd be nice to maybe get a draft, like an initial draft, but then I'm going to tailor it in the same way that when
Yeah.
I get a prompt that I like and I get a response that I like from a prompt that I provided, I still tailor it, right? I change some of the wording and make it sound more like myself just because you want that touch. So the email content itself, it'd be nice to maybe have a draft or like a template at a high level, but ultimately I'm gonna change it anyway. So that's not as important as having like the information from the Notion database in my email to the right person, and with the
Yeah.
subject, like sort of like all of that already populated in my email, I think. And there's Zaps for that. And ultimately, over time, Zap become, I think that it's one by one, line by line. It also allows me to not make mistakes. So sometimes if you're doing 50 of these, 43 or so, you get a little tired, you accidentally
Mm.
paste in the wrong thing, and then you have a redundancy with somebody else you've already emailed. And so,
Yeah.
there are some of these things that just are honestly just like monotonous tasks that then are so boring that you accidentally, you slip up a little bit.
Yeah.
Um,
That's interesting.
yeah.
It seems extremely doable. This is probably really in the weeds, but like for building tables and processes in Notion, if you there's a webhook to Zapier, so you can basically have everything come in. And I think you can connect. It could be possible to be like, when a message lands in this cell, on this cell, you generate a draft based on information from the same row. So you could pull in, and maybe it's like the email address it comes from is related. So it finds whatever row it's in based on the email address, or the ending of the email address. And then it lands there. You have a draft that pulls information from the same row. It would be cool to also have like, uh, you could edit it directly in that cell where the draft is, and then
It would be.
change the status of it and have it reply to them. Would be crazy.
That'd be amazing. I also think that as you say that out loud, I'm thinking it would be really nice, additionally, to have as I type in the company name or something like that, or even the email address. So it's able to infer based on the email address, the domain name. It could then populate other columns for me, because the
Yeah.
monotonous parts of the parts that I hate, are not necessarily that I hate, they're just time consuming and a waste of time. Like the
Yeah.
content creation is fine. The reasoning behind reaching out to them is interesting. I like those components of it. But if I were to just put in the email address, for example, it could then automatically pull the website and potentially Crunchbase funding or something like that, and allow for me to have all of that sort of immediately there in front of me, instead of on both sides of it. When I'm populating the spreadsheet, it takes a lot of time to get the data that I want, and having all these tabs open, copy paste the relevant
Yeah.
information. And then on the other end, it's copy paste into my email. Um, It'd be nice to sort of have both ends of that really, really simple, and then allow for me to just spend my time with the creative components, which are, why is this interesting to you? Why is it
Yeah.
interesting for me to speak to you? Those sorts of things.
That's cool. I wonder if you could have a row that does, so in Notion you have a row where you put the email address, or not the email address, the website domain of the company, and then there's either Zaps or some sort of webhook created. So in the next columns, it's like search for mission statement, and it actually goes either through a Zap and searches for the mission statement, returns it in a short way. And same for Crunchbase or any information. And you could even be like, uh, you could potentially use the OpenAI API or just a Zap to, in one of the columns too, to be like, based on all the information pulled into these columns, what business use case do you think we have for them, which could be cool. And
It is
with,
cool.
yeah, with like the way ChatGPT works, or if you're just building on the API, it can naturally just process that, and if the prompt's good enough, give you like a really easy automated setup to be like, okay, this is how we could serve them, which is cool.
That is a good idea. I think that I think at first I didn't understand the true sort of potential for having a tool like this at your disposal, because I didn't really realize its ability to make inferences in a way that, like, of course, we think that we have an ability to make inferences and be like reasoning, like we're the people who are reasoning so well. But in reality, this is like a reasoning machine, right? It's literally
Yeah.
that. And so it's really, really helpful for me, and I've found it helpful in brainstorming ideas for like business, like not necessarily like business ideas, but more so like business process ideas, like how to actually go about implementing processes. And I think I have a really good idea that I have years of experience like architecting those, but by virtue of the fact that this has like, it's a reasoning machine, it
Yeah.
sees things that I don't, it thinks of things that I don't. I think that is a really interesting and good point, is that you can also use it to help you sort of gain insights into things you might not be privy to, or things that you might not
Yeah.
be thinking about as a potential use case, that it just based on the relationships that it already understands really well, says, oh, okay, well, they could also use it for this reason. It's like, oh, I hadn't thought of that,
Yeah.
because my own workflow is so specific. So I think that's a really good point.
Yeah. Yeah, when you meet somebody and you have a like somebody new and you have a conversation that kind of like changes the way you see something. You have one of those like
Yes.
eye-opening conversations. It's almost like you can have one of those whenever you want.
Yeah,
I'm working
exactly.
on, I'm doing a workshop tomorrow with the AI Exchange, which is like a paid community, but I'm coming up with some prompts for the plugin just to show how it works. And the one I was working on right before this was like, create a career progression report for an operations analyst, just like a basic job at some company. And then I used it with perfect prompt, or prompt perfect. And
Hmm.
the interesting thing about that, and I also asked it to like show strategies to fast track your career growth, things like that, where you may be working a job and you're just kind of hate it, or you don't exactly think, you don't talk to the right people sometimes to be like, I could progress way faster in my career if I did these four things. Next thing you know,
Uh,
you write a pretty good prompt and it spits it out in less than 30 seconds with
Super
these are the
good. Yeah.
jobs you could go down the pipeline on. And then here's 4 actionable tips that you could start doing that could make your career progress quicker. It's kind of cool and something that you could have Google searched and gone through a lot of stuff earlier, but that immediacy to that information, and it's good information if you prompt it the right way and you make sure it's not going to give you the best advice on everything. To give you really really good advice on most things though is so cool to me, and
Yeah.
I'm
It's
excited
so
for it.
true. I mean, people pay top dollar for mentorship, for the ability to have. So I have a friend who works at he's a high level strategy VP level person at a very large media company in the United States, a very old media company, and he has a mentor who he pays lots of hundreds of dollars for time with once a month. And this sort of ideation or like sort of mentorship bot that you're talking about, or makes a ton of sense.
Yeah,
Makes so much sense. I think it depends on the LLM. Not all of them will act the same way with like, but I think that with GPT specifically, 3.5 at least, it certainly has a crazy
yeah,
breadth of information. That's a good
I know.
point. I think it democratizes access to things like that. So like not necessarily the best for somebody like him, maybe, but certainly better than the nothing option, which the vast majority of us have, right? Especially
Yeah,
if you're in a rural place, or if you have access to the internet, now you have access to a potential mentor. Or like
yeah.
a reasoning engine, right? I think that one of the things I had spoke about several weeks ago, I was talking about like my first misconception was that this is like an oracle. I was watching a talk
Mhm.
yesterday with Sam Altman, the CEO, who we spoke about extensively, CEO of OpenAI, and he'd had a talk at TUM, which is a university in Munich, and he was talking about he had specifically, I quoted this intentionally for this. He said, I think people make a big mistake when they think about these models as a database. If you're using it to search for daily news, it will sort of work, but it's the world's slowest, most expensive, and least accurate database. What makes this special is that it's trained as a reasoning engine, not to memorize all current data. So they're
Yeah,
really, really optimizing for the ability for it to reason at a high level, as opposed for it to have like an Oracle style breadth of knowledge. And so I think that
yeah,
just having that understanding from the onset really makes you want to reverse engineer the best possible prompts you can have, which relates back to prompt engineering and how much it's all pretty much, I feel like that's all we talk about, which is great. I think
yeah.
it's important to talk about it.
It's so new,
But
man. Yeah.
it's relevant. Yeah.
Well, it's
So it's kind of cool.
somebody did a research study, and I don't know who did it offhand. It might have been a bullshit one, but it was asking adults in different age ranges whether they find ChatGPT very useful, somewhat useful, not that useful, or like they'd hate it. And more than half the people were either somewhat useful or below, meaning that
Hmm.
like if you call something somewhat useful, you're like, yeah, it's okay. It's not that great. It's probably putting it on the same level as a Google, which is should be shocking, I guess, to people who use it a lot, but not really. Like a lot of people aren't using it for most of their day to day stuff. I think because it's a little unintuitive, and the idea of and why we talk about prompt engineering so much is one, I fucking love it. And so it's interesting
Yeah.
to learn how to talk to this reasoning unit. But two, there's just not a lot of solutions out there to help people figure out how to prompt or to build prompts for people so that they can use this tech to to make their life way easier or do 100% of their tasks in 10% of the time, that's the
Yeah.
goal.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm with you. I think it's really, yeah, it's a good point. We're just scratching the surface. I think
I know.
as time elapses, we'll have more and more updates there. So, I mean, something that we literally talk about all day, every day. So,
Yeah, that's fucking great. I want to talk
yeah,
a little bit about updates to ChatGPT Plus that came out this week or a week
yeah,
ago. Most notably, Bing browsing is built in if you're a paid customer and you turn it on in like beta settings. So it's still a beta product,
yeah, it's
but
great.
yeah, it's really cool. You can do a prompt, and if it's enabled, and if it thinks that it doesn't have the information, or if you ask it to search for something, it will use Bing and then act as a bot and actually go to the sites and read the sites and click through and find the information you're looking for. So I used it earlier today. I had to figure out something I didn't know how to do with a domain name. And I put that into ChatGPT and I said, can you find this file at this domain and this file and this file at this domain? And it it just went through, searched, found it, and sent me the links, which was really cool. I've
That is
also
cool.
used it to do a little bit of go research this thing on the internet and then do this advanced thing. So, like, go search for what is Hugging Face, and then write me a short essay on the pros, cons, and the future outlook of this technology. And it'll actually go do a bunch of research for you and then provide that report for you. So it's pretty incredible. It doesn't always work right. It's definitely buggy in a beta feature, but I've been I've been in the OpenAI community forums, and some people are like complaining about how buggy things are. I'm like, this is very early on, and you should be getting good with it now rather than waiting for the
Yeah.
perfect iteration of the product. Like, it's so
I would
cool.
argue it's less buggy than the web browsing plugins that came out, because I've been using it because you can't use it with plugins right now. It's one or the other.
Yeah.
And so you have to select which one you're going to use. And so I do often, especially before, because web browsing came out and then they rebranded the web browsing little to being Bing with the logo. And so it now feels a little bit more legit. They've actually, whether or not they just changed the name with the logo of Bing, I don't know, but it does work a little bit better from my perspective since they've made that upgrade. I don't exactly know the date of that, but it's been in the last 7 days or so. And then in comparison to using something like one of the two browser plugins you had mentioned last week by name, I don't remember the names of them, but it's more intuitive for me to use this, because when I type in a query here, if it doesn't have an answer within its own breadth of understanding, then it will actually look on the internet intuitive, like automatically, as opposed to
Yeah.
having to use some sort of prompt to get it to use the internet, which is what my experience was with those plugins. So it seems
Yeah.
like it's easier to use, which I really, really, really like. And obviously we've spoken about this, but Bing had paid $10 billion to or not 10 billion, 10 million. We wrote this down like last week. It couldn't have been 10 billion. It's a ridiculous number. But
I think it was.
was it 10 billion? Yeah, I think it was. The more I talk about it out loud, the more I'm like, oh no, that was the number. It's like, Jesus, that number is ridiculously large.
Yeah, it was
But
10 billion.
yeah, so it was, yeah, exactly. When I said it out
I
loud, I was like,
mean,
it can't be. It's too big.
that's a huge,
um,
I mean, just the idea of how many millions 10 billion is crazy.
yeah, exactly. So I'm sorry, but yeah, that's that large a number. But
That's 100,000
when they
million.
yeah, exactly. So they had integrated it in that sense. But yeah, so they allow for the ChatGPT plugins to be native into OpenAI's ChatGPT, but then vice versa, they're making it. I'm sorry, they're allowing for ChatGPT's plugins to be native into Bing Chat, and then vice versa, they're making Bing Chat functionality or the Bing search functionality native into ChatGPT and OpenAI. So it's symbiotic in that way. I don't know if I would have necessarily known that from the outset, although I probably could have inferred it. But it's a really, really cool idea, and I think it looks good. It works well. It's better than a plugin from my perspective,
Yeah.
than the web browsing plugins, at least. So it's cool to see the development of that partnership at a high level. It relates also to a way that I watched an IBM presentation about their new Watson X tool. Interesting. They're sort of doing it in a way, Watson's been an idea of theirs. They've sort of, it seems as though it hasn't been nearly as much to the fanfare that OpenAI's has been, because it doesn't have a chatbot component, but they're partnering with Hugging Face specifically. And they had announced that 2-3 days ago, or maybe 4 or 5 days ago. Huge partnership announcement. They had one of the co-founders of Hugging Face on stage with them at this event for Watson X. And so it's interesting. I don't think this week we're going to have time to talk about open source large language models, but it is
Yeah.
something I'm trying to do more research on and like sort of prepare myself to have a discussion with you at like a larger, more substantial level in the near future, maybe next week, around that. And in that research I was doing, I found that IBM partnered with Hugging Face this week. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah. It's cool.
Yeah, these big partnerships, people are definitely not sleeping on this AI and LLM movement that we're seeing. I think it's finally coming to this turning point where it's like, oh crap, this is actually happening, which is really exciting. And
Yeah.
people like OpenAI have been building for 7 years. Hugging Space has been building for 4.5, almost 5 years. And so a lot of people saw the writing on the wall, have been writing on the walls and have been building on this. But ultimately, sort of some of us, myself included, are just sort of realizing it now. Despite the fact that I've been subscribing to to Sam Altman's, his newsletter for a very long time. But when he had come out with WorldCoin, I actually unsubscribed because I thought that was so weird. To be completely honest with you, but
Yeah.
that's a whole different thing for a whole different time. But,
Oh yeah, we can get into it. But yeah, it's still so early, Charlie, though, just because they've been building for 7 years, but now is like prime building time for things on OpenAI,
Yeah,
in my opinion. There's just so much noise and so little actual awesome output so far. I mean, there's really cool things being built, but it's more like people play, it's like everybody's building little chat rooms at the beginning of the internet, and nobody's
yeah,
nobody's building the Facebooks, the MySpaces, the really cool things that could get a lot of users and are very user friendly, makes sense, like things that just make sense for a, a user who doesn't really care that much about the deep tech stuff. They just want to log in and get something that gives them value. I think there's going to be a
yeah,
lot of things that do that, but they're all like currently being ideated or being built, which is cool.
yeah. It's true. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, by virtue of the fact that that survey reflected that most people don't really see it as useful, to me is that means that there's an education problem, not like a tool problem, right? Like the tool itself is not bad. It's that people don't know how to use the tool, it seems.
It's not the best. It's not the most intuitive tool.
Yeah.
It's like
I
it's like
guess
a
that when I say tool, I don't mean ChatGPT specifically. I meant more like the underlying tech under the hood. Like people are
oh
building on
yeah,
the API in a way. Yeah, yeah. I meant more like the technology, I guess, than
yeah,
ChatGPT. Because you know how I feel about how shitty the UX for ChatGPT
I
is
know.
specifically. We've spoken about that at length.
That's not that great of a product, but it's cool. It's
Yeah,
definitely. I mean, I'm kind of glad it's not, because if everybody was getting the same value I'm getting, it'd be a different ball game.
it wouldn't be a differentiator. Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm arbitraging that right now, which is cool.
Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to as well, catching up. That was a cool feature. I also noticed earlier in the week, before you had shared one or two with me, I've shared one or two since, but I had noticed earlier in the week that I can now share conversations I'm having with ChatGPT, which is awesome.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's
yeah.
only for Plus users or not, but it's a really, really cool idea.
I don't know either. I wrote Plus users in here, but I'd assume it's only Plus users, but it'd be cool if it was everybody, because you can share your conversations that you have, and it opens it up in a way where if you send it to somebody, they can just say continue the conversation, and they can open up a chat with that conversation with the prompts that you're sharing with them and the output, which is really cool. I think it opens up an opportunity, and I saw somebody say this week that there's like an opportunity for almost a different type of social platform that involves sharing the type of things you can do with AI, which is really cool.
Hmm,
I just think it's a fun idea to be able to share awesome prompts with people that they would get value out of. And
it's a good point.
yeah, there could be some cool things built out of it. And it's just going to be fun for this workshop tomorrow. I'm just going to use the share link for a bunch of it, so I don't have to like do all this workaround stuff. It's very convenient.
Yeah, that's cool. I thought that was it's interesting. I'm not like religiously following like a product newsletter from them or anything like that. They're just sort of being rolled out in real time. I'm noticing them, so it's yeah, it's easy to assume that these organizations are so like dialed and perfect, but ultimately there's so much news, there's so much dissemination of that news, there's so many mediums to share that news, and a lot of it gets lost in the ether for me. And I don't wear an Apple Watch. I'm not, I have no notification on my phone, like, so maybe I'm the hardest one to get a hold of to a certain extent. But some of these things, I think that there's even a place for a better dissemination of this information.
Yeah.
Like the sharing tool, I had no idea about it until I noticed it,
Yeah.
4 days ago. That's pretty cool though. I think it's
Yeah.
really, really, really cool.
Yeah. OpenAI has a way of you just finding things on ChatGPT, be like, oh, that's cool. That's neat. Like I found my
Yeah,
plugin
exactly.
on ChatGPT one day. I was like, oh, that's neat, dude. Like a sharing thing just
Yeah,
pops
that's
up
cool.
one day. Or they change the
Yeah,
UI and you're just like, okay. Um,
yeah, exactly.
that's interesting. That's kind of the way they operate, but
Yeah,
it's cool. I think they're
for
working on
better or
product
worse.
stuff. We'll see what happens. Every week, this space is crazy. It's hard keeping up to date with it is nearly impossible. Like that's why I'm kind of laser focused. I try not to let the shiny things get out of the way. It's like this is what I need to focus on now, which is basically the OpenAI platform, prompt engineering, and building out this little tiny company we're gonna start molding into a beautiful sculpture.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Um, Awesome, man. I think I'd like to hold off on the open source LLMs Hugging Face conversation,
Yeah.
just because I've been doing research on it, and I'm not really at a place where I feel really confident about my ability to speak to it at like a deep level. I think in general it's really interesting, and the way that IBM has made the design decision, the pitch that they made is very interesting. It's a very salesy.
I thought
They
you
have a
said you weren't going
product.
to talk about it.
Well, yeah, it's a good point. I don't have to talk
Yeah,
about it,
you can say
but
if we can do a dedicated episode to it.
yeah, I think the presentation that IBM had presented around Watson X, their ability to, or their decision to leverage open source technology with Hugging Face and the aggregation of all of the models they have there is interesting, and it's powerful in and of itself. And it shows that there's something really, really interesting there. It also shows that IBM is a little bit behind something like an OpenAI or even a Google with their Bard product. Or even Microsoft with their sort of massive investment in OpenAI and the ability to then tailor that information and white label it as their own, shows that IBM is taking a different approach, more of an open source approach. And I think that in general, open source has a place, like Linux has a place, although it's sort of on the underground in general in the world. Um, this is sort of a new frontier, and so it's interesting to see the way different corporations are approaching it. But yeah, Hugging Face is an interesting one that I've had to. It just comes up all the time, and so it's interesting to sort of like think about it at a high level. And as from like a business perspective, you don't necessarily want to tie yourself too closely to a corporation, right? As part of your business model. It's one thing to be an app developer that's in the app store for Apple, but it's a whole different thing to have your standalone product that people pay for as a web app, right? And I think that like there are larger profit margins, but there's also the community and lack of marketplace. It's harder to get in front of people. So you end up tying yourself to marketing budgets probably and different things like that. So there's, it's interesting to think about the OpenAI approach and the businesses that are tying themselves to that API itself, and then the way that other organizations are really leaning into the open source movement, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But there's certainly a lot happening there. And I just wish I had more time to have prepared for this week. But I think in and of itself, it's like another 40 minutes of talking. So I want to make sure I'm prepared to make it more succinct.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay,
What else are you thinking about for this week? I don't want to cut us short, but I think that it might be nice to have a relatively.
Yeah, I think that's cool. I should probably turn on my fan though, because I think it's time for a hot take. That was
This
probably
is
my
definitely my
worst
favorite
one
part
of
of
the
the
past
episode.
month. Yeah,
Yeah, these are my favorite. This is my favorite part of every episode. Is listening to
yeah.
Eric think about
Our
how we
hot
can
takes that
like
are really
smoothly transition into. Yeah.
uh,
Well, what's yours? What's your hot take?
well, just keeping in with tradition instead of actually having a hot take, I just have a gentle, nice piece of life advice, which is
Love it.
I was listening to a podcast about, I think it was Paul Graham's essays, but one thing was about growing that really connected with me because right now I'm just putting in the foundations for what is apparently going to be a company that is focused on prompt engineering. But it was that if you focus on 10% week over week compounding growth, you can, in a year, if you did that every week, you focused on growing your user base 10%, you would go from 100 users to 14,000 users over 12 months.
Wow,
And then if you
that's
kept
so
that up
interesting.
for a second year, you'd be over 1 million users, which is crazy. And it's
Wow.
one of yeah, it's one of those simple things where like you'd be like, I don't know how you could ever get to from 100 to 14,000 users, but if every week you're doing things and you build this little tool set to grow 10%, and when you don't get it, you change and you try and focus on getting it the next week. Eventually, you can make those really small things have a big effect over time, which is cool. And shit like that gets me jacked up. So I heard that, and it's been
That's
like
awesome.
locked in my brain now. Yeah, you can apply it to
Oh,
almost
that's cool.
anything, which is cool. Yeah,
Hmm. That's a massive number over the course of just 24 months.
yeah. I think it's like 1.2 million. Go from 100 to 1.2 million users by just 10% every week.
Wow, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
I think that my hot take is I think that there's a lot happening in the open source movement for large language models and AI, and I think my hot take is that I don't know. I think my hot take is that these organizations, there was a letter that was signed this week. It was like a 2 sentence letter. It was like less than 25 words, and it just said that AGI, so artificial general intelligence, is something that we need to address from a legislative perspective, and like we need to sort of mitigate the risk of AGI becoming a threat to humanity, effectively, and
Yeah.
a threat to humanity on the same scale as atomic weaponry. Um, I understand that, it's interesting, and that there are hundreds and hundreds of like really, really intelligent people who are signing on to that. And it's interesting. There's just a part of me that thinks that there's Sam Altman was in DC last week talking with Congress about this sort of thing, and he's just yesing them to death. And he's like really explaining how this is a huge threat. We need to regulate it. But he's in the best position to profit from a market revenue share from that regulation, getting a seat at the table. And I think that there's interesting. I think that open source is going to make it such that no matter what happens, there's going to be open source sort of componentry behind some of the, maybe not equal, but maybe lesser models, and those will still be available. And so I'm interested to see how that plays out. I think that there's, I really don't want for this to become monopolistic in the way that a lot of email, for example, has become very monopolistic. And it's maybe like a duopoly or between Microsoft and Gmail, Google. So I don't know. My
Yeah.
hot take is maybe that.
I don't know if there's enough
open
like
source
machine learning engineers for there to be healthy eco. Like, I don't know. It feels like it's a very small industry, which makes it tough.
It's a good
I'm
point.
with you. Yeah. But yeah, Sam also is like a fan of open source LLMs and smaller LLMs still having room to grow. But I think they've just seen so much crazy growth. And I'm sure Google is doing some crazy shit with DeepMind and everything they have. Like, it sounds like they're getting more scared with the capabilities and most likely want some sort of action that could be taken if somebody goes too far. Because we're getting close, Yeah, the things we're doing right now are pretty crazy.
Yeah, there already are sort of like, there is legislation in place that allows that, like, that mitigates the risk of people doing criminal acts.
Yeah.
And so what are we regulating? Like, there are already laws in place around criminal activity. So it's like, what is it that you want for everybody to go through a submission process, like patents, in order to patents aren't even a good example because you can like develop it before you actually get the patent. But like, if you want everybody to go through like a regulatory process, like regulatory body that then approves for your,
I think it's
your
specifically
algorithms,
about models, or what models can and can't do, like, should there be regulations around whether a model can tell you how to inflict the most amount of harm on a group of people, or like come up with a strategic strategy to overthrow the government, or give you the blueprints for your enemy's home so that you can like break in? Like, I don't know. But also, it's just, I think they're worried that there's going to be a like outbreak of an AI that can iterate on itself, like a lot of what we were talking about with the agent to agent communication, like companies messing around with trying to get AI models to work together to achieve something, which sounds like they like doomsday scenarios are, they just get into the computer grid and start fucking around with stuff.
Yeah.
Build some
That's fair. Yeah. I'm interested to see how it plays out. I guess I'm just, it's just interesting to me. I think it's noteworthy. Excuse me. I don't know. It's just like, it seems to me, and I don't mean to be a hater. I'm just trying to be myself. And it's weird to me when you see like a sci-fi book playing out in real time. And like, it seems to me like Sam Altman is altruistic to a certain extent. He's very into meditation. I love meditating. You love meditating. We all love, meditation's great. And ultimately there's a lot to be said for that. But when I listen to him speak about some things, I listened to a talk with him a couple of days ago where he's at like a meditation forum and he's talking about how he really wants for this to be like a reasoning engine that allows for us to become more like, to approach the singularity and allow for us to have like something that's relative, not omniscient, but like a reasoning engine that allows for us to make all decision making much, much easier and everything more aligned with the way that the Buddha lived. And it's like, what do you like? Is that really what you want? And then you realize like, oh, this guy's the one in front of Congress who's like the leader, the CTO guy who's like in front of them and speaking to them in a way that's allowing for the jargon to be re-understood by his own organization. But in reality, they're the lay people. and they're just sort of like scooping up what he's done and what he's saying in the same way that they scooped up what Sam Bankman-Fried was telling them. Very different, but a little bit parallel in the respect that they seem to be receiving.
Yeah.
And in reality, he seems altruistic, and sure, Buddhism is fascinating, but ultimately, like, do we want further to be like an attribution of value based on somebody's personal beliefs that that's the best way to live? Like, I'm not certain of that. And I don't know. I just think it seems a little bit to me like it's something to keep track of. And like, I don't want to just hand over the reins of all the decision power to like one guy, although he seems very altruistic and very like has the right motivations.
Yeah.
I just am
Also,
generally not necessarily trustworthy of people.
yeah. And I mean, he's not an actual, I know he's been a programmer, but he's like the CEO of the nonprofit as opposed to the
Yeah,
co-founder. I'm going to butcher pronouncing his name, but like, he's
yeah, I
not
know who
the
you're
only
talking about.
decision maker, he's definitely the front facing best speaker of the organization. Um, but I'm less worried about him than I think you are. Granted, I didn't see the weird Buddha conversation. He's
Yeah,
also
it's
probably,
cool. It is what it is.
yeah,
I
he's
don't know.
also probably going to be one of the richest human beings of all time in 15 years when, uh, what is it, nuclear fission energy or fusion energy, and then his other huge invest. He basically invested 100% of his net worth in fusion energy, and then longevity science. I think. Did we talk about that last week? But yeah,
No, we didn't.
I think if he nails those two, and he's a really good investor, and he put the amount of money that I think he put like in excess of 300 million into fusion energy and like another 200 million into the longevity stuff. Like if those pay off, he's going to be a Elon level billionaire, which is crazy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. But that's a hot take for you. Is that I'm skeptical of the altruism behind the guy, and like I don't know. I just think it's
Yeah,
interesting.
no, dude, that is a hot take. Everybody loves Sam Altman, man.
Yeah.
But just wait
When he
six
came out with
months, you
that
never
work
know.
point thing, it was an absolute mind fuck for me. It's like you want to scan people's irises and distribute cryptocurrency to people based on their irises? Like that is very, very dystopian. That seems just like, and you do any reading into it, and it's like all the people who are talking about it are like really, really weird cultish type people who are like, this is the greatest thing ever. It's like, dude, what are you talking about? I don't know anything about you, and I do not want to listen to what you think is the best thing ever, dude. Like, what are you seem like you're brainwashed.
Yeah,
Um, and it came with a ton of pushback, and like, I don't
yeah,
know, you can really sway people with interesting things, like anything to believe in a place where it's hard to get things done, like living in rural Zambia for a couple of years. You can see some people like really swayed by the Mormon church, for example, or Seventh-day Adventists. It's interesting. I do think that a lot of the people who were there as missionaries doing that work, the other white people who were my brothers, because everybody who's white is related to me, who I'd be introduced to, they're oftentimes not there because they're so intelligent and they think that they're saving people. They're there because they're brainwashed and they think that they're saving people. And so
yeah,
I don't know, when you think about like distribution of cryptocurrency based on iris scanning and like having to go to this like thing that you then literally scan your iris in and then you get some sort of digital currency through, it's like, explain it to me in more detail without like the sales pitch that like you also have tattooed on your back. Like just tell me a little bit more about like why and what,
yeah.
not so much like what I'm missing out on. It's like, what the
I
fuck are you
yeah,
talking about?
I know the Irish thing's weird. I know from the very like little pieces I've grabbed of information about where at least Sam Altman and OpenAI thinks the future of money is going. I think they think that AI is going to put so many people out of jobs that they won't need that there will need to be. They've like I think they funded the like biggest study on universal basic income, like
Mhm.
trying to figure out a way to make sure people can still afford to live if so many people are like out of jobs. But I don't know if the iris is the way to do that. It's a little weird. Um,
Yeah,
but
in this Buddha
dude,
talk,
if
like
they're
not
giving
some of
me,
it actually is, but
yeah, if they're giving me a universal basic income, fucking, I'll take that shit. I
I
will.
don't know, dude. If I can't spend it at the bodega where I just got my sandwich, then what's the use? Like
Yeah.
I just don't know. Like, yeah, I don't know. I just tend to. I remember because I subscribed to his newsletter. I have for years and years and years and years, and then because he was like the CEO of Y Combinator, and it's like really, really well-connected, extremely well-respected person. And when he had come out with the WorldCoin thing, I had read sort of like the article. It came to my inbox and I'd read it and I was like, this dude is out of touch. Like this is out of touch. And so I unsubscribed. And then since then, OpenAI has come out with ChatGPT, and I like wasn't the first to know because I didn't have, I wasn't in
Yeah.
his newsletter anymore, which is very sort of ironic and funny.
That's funny.
But now no one's talking about that. So it's like, well, I don't know. I'm just like, I don't know. They're like talking like we need to have like a global council of people who attribute value and determine what it is that the AI think is and is not valuable. And it's like,
Yeah. I
who
mean,
determines those folks? Is
I
it you,
most
Sam? Who voted you, Sam?
I most notably in my capstone for political science hung over in my last, like where they do the cross examination. I told my class with the amount of nuclear weapons that are out in the world, the only way for there to be a sustainable world is for a one world government. So I'm kind of on, it's not far from my beliefs because we're in a weird world, but
That's fair. I don't
yeah,
think it's
we could,
necessarily bad. I just don't necessarily
dude, it
know
would be
that
fun to
I
do.
wanna.
We should lean into it. If we
Yeah,
like the conversation, do an episode on WorldCoin one day would be fun.
yeah. We could do an episode. Yeah, for sure. We could do a little background on Sam and then talk about WorldCoin because
Yeah,
WorldCoin as an idea, if it was without him, is like, who are these schmucks? And then it's like, oh, it's World. Okay, Sam. Okay, interesting. Who's
yeah.
this guy? It's like,
Put
oh,
his name
interesting.
on it, dude. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I don't know. There's some hot take stirring the pot for you.
I
Just
like it,
stirring the
dude.
pot, baby.
Anything that gets
All right,
us
cool.
going, dude, and we get charged up. That's a good topic. We'll
Yeah, true.
earmark it.
Seriously.
Yeah.
All right, epic. There's episode 18. I hope everybody's looking at the Notion docs now that we got everything set up there. But we'll post this one soon, and then yeah, we'll be here next week.
Dope. See you then.
Shout out to Josiah Soren though. Thanks for the intro
Yeah,
music, brother.
I don't know.
Thanks, dude. Yeah. All right, sick. All right, well, I'll catch you later. Ciao, my man.
Yeah.